The Marenfall Abbey had been abandoned for nearly 200 years. Ivy strangled its broken arches, and rainwater collected in the choir loft where monks once sang at dawn. You arrived at the request of the local diocese not as a priest but as an archivist, a scholar. Your task was simple: catalog the ruins, list anything salvageable, and send what you could to the cathedral in Dunlath for preservation. The sun was already slipping behind the hills when you stepped into what had once been the sacristy, a damp stone room cluttered with mold-worn vestments and fragments of wooden shelves. It smelled of lichen and old fire. You worked silently, methodically, brushing dust off chalices, noting broken candelabras until something pulled at you. A draft that didn't belong, a current of air from a wall that should have been solid. You traced your fingers along the mortar. Something was off, the stone was uneven, pressed in hollow behind. You picked up your chisel, hesitated, and struck just once. The wall groaned, the plaster cracked like old bone. Behind it, a cavity sealed with wax, blackened and brittle. A symbol was pressed into the wax, half erased but still sharp enough to unsettle you. It was not Latin, not Greek, not Hebrew. It curled in a way that hurt to look at, like an eye turning in on itself. You broke the seal. Inside, wrapped in velvet that had faded to ash, was a small pendant, cold to the touch, made of some kind of blackened bronze or tarnished silver, its chain coiled like a serpent. The symbol on the pendant matched the wax seal exactly. You picked it up and something shifted. The air grew thick. The shadows in the corners deepened. You blinked, and for a second, just 1 second, you weren't standing in a ruined abbey. You were in a hall lit by candles made of tallow. Chanting echoed all around you, deep, guttural, not in any language you recognized. A dozen figures stood robed in gray, their faces obscured, all turned toward an altar carved with that same symbol. Then gone. Back to the crumbling room, your hands still closed around the pendant. Your heart was pounding, but not from fear. No, something else. It was recognition, as though some part of you remembered this place, this object. And in the silence that followed, you realized the birds outside had stopped singing. Do you want part two now? The bishop's reaction will make everything darker. You didn't sleep that night. The relic sat on your desk, wrapped again in what little cloth you had, locked in the drawer you never used, but still it felt like it watched you, like it pulsed faintly in the dark. You kept the lamp burning until the oil ran low, sketching the symbol again and again on scraps of paper. You weren't an artist, but the lines came easily, as if your hand already knew the curves. The next morning you traveled to the diocese office in Dunlath. The bishop, Father Emeric, had served the church for over 40 years. A serious man, hard to rattle. He had seen heresies, uprisings, even war. You brought the sketch to him in confidence, laid it out on his table between a worn Bible and a half-finished sermon. He didn't speak at first, just stared at it. The silence stretched long. When he finally looked up, his eyes were not angry, but afraid. "Where did you see this?" he asked. His voice was low, careful. You told him about the abbey, about the hidden wall, about the pendant. He went pale. Not white, but ashen, like all the blood had sunk from his skin. His fingers reached for the paper, trembling slightly, and before you could ask more, he stood, walked to the hearth, and threw the sketch into the fire. You started to protest, but he raised a hand, not with authority, but with pleading. "That symbol," he said, "does not belong to the church, not anymore." You asked him what he meant. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he told you something you weren't expecting. "There are orders older than Rome," he said quietly. "Ones we chose to forget, not because they were false, but because they were too close to the truth, dangerous truths. This is from one of them." Then he did something that unsettled you more than any of his words. He made the sign of the cross, not over himself, but over you. And with a voice full of exhaustion, he whispered, "Whatever you touched, let it stay buried. You are not the first to find it, but I pray to God you are the last." You left the diocese office with more questions than answers. But as you stepped into the cold wind of the cathedral courtyard, something sharp pressed against your chest. Beneath your shirt, a heat you hadn't felt before. You reached into your pocket. The relic, still wrapped, still locked, was not there. It was hanging from your neck, and you hadn't put it on. You didn't remember placing it around your neck. But there it was, cold and metallic against your skin, yet pulsing faintly with a warmth that felt wrong. Like the heat wasn't coming from metal, but from something deeper, something watching you from the inside. You tore it off immediately, wrapping it in the cloth once more and burying it deep in your satchel, not throwing it away. Not yet. You told yourself it was caution. You didn't yet believe in curses, but you were starting to believe in patterns. In warnings, you returned home just before dusk. The village seemed quieter than usual, not peaceful, more like holding its breath. You decided to do what you'd always done when you were unsure: research. Your cottage was filled with old volumes from the monastery, some salvaged from crumbling abbeys, others copied by your own hand. You went straight to your shelves, seeking any reference to the symbol, to ancient orders, to banned relics. Nothing. Not in the books of saints, not in the compendiums of heresies, not even in the Apocrypha. It was like the symbol had never existed. You didn't stop. You spent the next 3 hours searching every codex, every side note, even the scribbled margins of forgotten tomes. Then something, not in a book, in the records. You had transcribed centuries of parish histories, births, deaths, marriages, sins confessed and absolved. You kept them meticulously in a chest beneath the floorboards, wrapped in oilcloth and bound in leather. You knew every name in those pages, but when you pulled them out, one bundle was missing. The year 1347, gone, the same year carved into the base of the relic. You froze. Not because the book was missing, but because you remembered copying it by hand. It had taken you weeks. You had written those names with your own ink. You had read them aloud. You remembered, and yet now there was nothing, not a scrap. Not even a page torn loose, as if the year had been erased, not by thieves but by intent. A knock came at the door. You didn't move. The knock came again, soft, deliberate, too slow to be a neighbor. You waited, breath held. Whoever it was didn't knock a third time. When you finally opened the door, there was no one there. Only a small bundle left on the step, wrapped in linen, just like the relic. But inside, this one was a page. A single torn parchment with just 5 words, scrawled in a jagged, ancient hand. You've remembered what was erased. You looked up from the note, heart pounding, and in the distance, you heard it again. The relic humming. Not in your satchel anymore, back on your neck. You don't remember putting it back on, you're sure of that. Yet when you reach toward your chest, your fingers meet it again, cool metal, still pulsing, still humming like a quiet breath under your skin. You wrench it off harder this time and toss it into the hearth. The flames crackle around it, but the relic doesn't blacken, doesn't melt. It only glows brighter, a soft, deep red, as if the fire is feeding it. You stagger back, the air thickens. Not with smoke, but with a pressure, like being watched, not from the window, not from the door, from inside, and then you hear it. Not a voice, not exactly, but a presence. Inside your head, low and curling at the edges of your thoughts like steam. It doesn't speak in words, not at first. It speaks in knowing, in memories you shouldn't have, a chapel without a roof, a procession of masked monks walking backward, a prayer you've never said but somehow remember. You fall to your knees, clutching your temples. A word finally forms, whispered in a tongue that feels carved into the bones of the world, Domini. The name of a woman or a title you don't know, but you feel her now, watching you, calling you. No claiming you, you scramble away from the fire where the relic now pulses like a heartbeat. The room has gone cold. Your breath shows in the air. The candles flicker though there's no wind. And then a knock, but not on the door. From beneath the floorboards once, twice. Then silence. You dare not move. You dare not blink. And then the boards creak slowly from the inside, as though someone or something has begun to rise, not from hell, but from memory. From the year 1347. You do not scream. You want to. Every instinct tells you to run, to cry out, to shatter the silence with anything louder than what is rising beneath you. But you stay still, jaw clenched, fingers gripping the edge of the table hard enough to splinter it, because some part of you knows whatever is down there, it hears fear. It listens for panic like a wolf listens for the rustling of prey in the underbrush. The knock returns, but this time it's not wood on wood, it's something softer, like flesh, skin slapping timber, slow, deliberate counting. You take one breath. Then another, and with shaking hands you reach for the journal again, the one the relic was hidden inside. Pages flutter as though the book resists you now, as if it too remembers, and there it is, scrawled on the last page in ink darker than black. A name you don't recognize, and yet your lips part, whispering it before your mind even catches up. Thamuel. The moment the name leaves your mouth, the knock stops, dead silence, no wind, no footsteps. Not even the creak of settling stone. Then the floorboard beneath you shifts, you leap back, heart hammering. One plank bends upward slightly, like something pushing against it from below, but nothing emerges, not yet. Instead, from the fireplace, the relic glows again, and this time it lifts, unaided, hovering inches above the flames. The light it casts turns the room crimson. Your shadow stretches in all directions, writhing like it doesn't belong to you. And on the walls, words begin to appear, not carved, not painted, they bloom in blood. You have spoken his name. One by one, the candles extinguish themselves, not blown out, consumed, the wicks hissing as they vanish. The relic falls. Not to the hearth, but to the floorboards at your feet, specifically to the plank that moved. You kneel slowly, against reason, against logic. You pry it loose, and what you find beneath is not earth, not stone, but paper, pages. Hundreds of them stacked, preserved, bound not with twine but hair, and on each one in ink that gleams like wet blood, your own name written again and again, and the date beside it, tomorrow. You don't remember how long you sat there. The cold had started to creep up from the open floor, but your body no longer registered it. The only thing you could feel, truly feel, was the weight of those pages beneath your fingertips. The ink hadn't dried, each line shimmered faintly as if it had just been written moments before you arrived, and your name repeated over and over, not only in your language, but in Latin, Aramaic, something else, something older. Curved and jagged like a serpent folding into itself, and beside each one, the same date, tomorrow, 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 over 100 sheets, maybe more. You didn't dare count. For a moment, your breath stilled completely. Not from fear, but recognition, deep, terrible recognition. You had seen this handwriting before. In the back of the monastery library, there was a single volume never loaned, only whispered about, De Inscriptus. A heretical ledger banned centuries ago, said to be authored not by a man, but by the hand of the seraphim who fell before language was law. No one could say where it had gone. It was assumed burned during the Quiet Purge. But you knew now it was never destroyed. It had simply changed forms, and it had been waiting. The relic, now dim and inert, lay beside the pile. You reached for it slowly. As soon as your fingers brushed the surface, something behind your eyes pulsed. Not pain, more like memory, not your own but something borrowed. You saw things. Vast cities, not of this world, swallowed by ash and light. You saw a choir of beings, not angelic, not demonic, but suspended in the agony of purpose. You saw yourself older, bloodied, eyes blackened, kneeling in a chamber of salt and gold, whispering the names written on these pages. And then it snapped like a thread pulled too tight. You were back in the chapel, gasping, sweat soaking through your robes, a coppery taste on your tongue. The knock returned, this time not from the floor, but from the walls. You turned. Every side of the room now bore script, glowing, pulsing, alive, not a language, but intention, commands etched by something that did not speak in voice, but in destiny. Then the door creaked open. No one stood there, only air, still, heavy. And silence so loud it screamed. You stepped forward and froze, because just beyond the threshold the hallway had changed. It was no longer stone and candlelight. It was dark, endless, covered in script. Leading deeper into something you had no name for, but you stepped through anyway, because the pages had already written what you would do next, and whatever lay beyond already knew you were coming. The first thing you noticed was the breathing. Not yours, not human. The corridor beyond the chapel door wasn't quiet, not in the way sacred places are. It pulsed like lungs filling with air you couldn't feel. The walls were impossibly tall, narrowing into a vanishing point somewhere ahead, and every inch was covered in writing, layered scripts from every known language and many you couldn't name. Lines stacked upon lines like scars. Some carved deep into the stone, others written in something that shimmered like oil in moonlight, and the walls were speaking, not aloud but inside you. Each step you took made the air thicker, like wading into water. Your heartbeat didn't quicken, it aligned perfectly to the rhythm of the corridor. Thump, step, thump, word, like it wasn't you moving, but something moving through you. Somewhere far behind, the chapel door closed with a soft, final click. You didn't turn back, because even if you had, the door would not be there anymore. At first, the words on the wall repeated verses from Scripture. Psalms, Gospels, litanies of saints, almost comforting. But as you moved deeper, the tone changed. The languages grew older, the content darker. Lists of names appeared, names you recognized. Some were fellow archivists, others were men long dead, and some hadn't died yet. One line read: Anselm, throat split by sacred silver. 3 days, you stumbled. Anselm, the prior, the one who warned you not to dig into sealed records, the one who kept the monastery's red room locked with 3 keys. The next line was worse. You found kneeling, mouth open, words still pouring out, no date, just inevitability. You ran your hand over the words, hoping they'd smudge, change, lie, but they were as fixed as bone. You stepped back only to realize the corridor behind you had shifted. There was no way back, only forward. You walked for what felt like hours. No doors, no turns, just more script. At some point you began hearing voices, not whispers this time, but familiar ones. Your mother calling your name from childhood, a friend laughing as if across a courtyard. The monk who once died in your arms, reciting a verse he never finished in life, but you were alone. And then the corridor widened, not into a room, not a sanctuary, but into a space without ceiling or floor. Just a vast circular library made of nothing but language, floating tomes, spirals of paper orbiting like planets, and in the center, resting atop a pedestal of bone and rusted chain, was a second relic. It wasn't the same as the one from the chapel. It was older, and it was humming, not musically, but like a prayer caught in the throat of the earth. You didn't approach, not yet, because the writing on the walls around this space had changed again. Now it was just one phrase, repeated in different tongues, over and over until your vision blurred. He who reads it rewrites himself. And beneath it, carved deeper than the others, he who touches it rewrites everything. You took one step forward, not because you chose to, but because the air pulled you. Like a tide, invisible and irreversible. The floor didn't creak beneath you because there was no floor anymore, only language. You were walking on words, on scripture too ancient to decipher, and yet each step made sense to your body in a way your mind refused to understand. The relic was no longer humming, it was listening, you could feel it. The way one might feel a presence in the room before the candle flickers, not with your skin but something beneath it. Your breath shortened. The silence around you had weight, thick like damp wool on your shoulders, and at the center of it was that thing, resting calmly as if it had been waiting for you. It didn't resemble the first relic you found. This one was round, like an orb, but not made of metal or stone. Its surface was covered in living script, words that shifted as you watched, as if aware of your gaze. Then a slit formed across its center, and it opened, not an object, not a vessel, but an eye. It was not human, not bestial either, just old, unblinking, and it saw you not in the way people see one another, but in the way fire sees dry wood. As purpose, as sequence, you tried to speak, to pray, to remember a psalm, a verse, even a name. But your mouth would not obey, your tongue was too thick, the words had abandoned you. Instead, the eye blinked once, and your mind opened. Memories were no longer linear. The room twisted around you like a scroll unraveling. Your first breath, the moment you first read Latin, the boy you kissed in secret, the scent of your dying mentor's robes. All of it laid bare, reordered, retranslated, not erased, rewritten. Suddenly you saw what the church was trying to hide. This was no relic, this was a root, a seed buried deep beneath centuries of doctrine and ritual, alive and watching. A truth older than scripture, a force that remembered when the world was still being named, and now it had your name. You fell to your knees, not out of reverence, but because your body couldn't hold itself together. Your thoughts came out of order. You remembered things that hadn't happened yet. You forgot the monastery's name. You forgot your own face. And then the eye spoke, not aloud, not in a voice, but in ink. Black liquid bled from the pedestal, running in thin veins toward your knees. Wherever it touched you, it wrote on you, names, symbols, sentences. It was using your skin as parchment. And in that moment you realized you were becoming the next relic, a living manuscript, a vessel of forgotten scripture. The church had been right to fear it, but too late. You had already turned the page. They had names once, you remembered that. Even now, with half your thoughts stitched into foreign script along your arms, you remembered their faces. You weren't the first to step into that hidden chamber beneath the abbey. You weren't the first to feel the air change when the relic blinked. There had been others, and they had never returned. At first, their absence was called disobedience. You overheard whispered conversations behind candlelit corridors. Brother Emil went rogue. Sister Corvina had doubts. Brother Silas was caught reading the wrong texts. But you had known Emil. You had touched the spine of the book Corvina had died protecting, and Silas. Silas had once shown you the margins of a forbidden codex where ancient ink refused to dry. These people hadn't abandoned the church. They had found something. Something that had written them out. Now, in the low light of that underground sanctum, you saw what the church refused to admit. Their names were still here, etched onto the walls in the same living ink that now pulsed beneath your skin. Written over and over like a prayer or a warning, each name coiled into itself, repeating in a spiral as if each syllable were a trap waiting to be triggered. But where were the bodies? Where were the bones? There were none. Only robes folded neatly in corners untouched by time, quills left mid-sentence, and silence thick enough to swallow sound. Then you saw it, a second door, tucked behind a curtain of hanging manuscripts. You approached it on instinct, not curiosity. It didn't creak, it didn't resist, it simply opened as if it had always known you would come. Inside, the air was still, not quiet, still, as if time refused to move here. And in the center of that impossible space, they stood in a circle, 9 figures, robes intact, eyes closed, hands raised not in prayer but in stillness. Their mouths were sewn shut with golden thread, lips trembling faintly as if whispering something through flesh. They weren't dead, but they weren't alive either. They were held, suspended between pages. Each bore the markings of the relic, symbols inked into their flesh, glowing faintly in rhythm with something unseen. Their presence was calm, almost serene. But underneath that calm was a pressure in the air, like a breath waiting to be exhaled. You tried to speak. Their eyes opened, not in unison, one at a time, and with each gaze that met yours, a word burned itself onto your spine. Witness. Then another, remember. A third, translate. Each word etched itself deeper than the last, not on your skin, but on your mind. You fell backwards, gasping, the door ceiling shut behind you without a sound. The room had claimed you. You were now the 10th. The church would deny this chamber's existence. But one day, a future scribe would find your robe, folded in the corner, and they would ask, why is your name missing from every record? They called it the doctrine of unwriting, but you would not find it in any holy text. It was never inked on vellum, nor whispered in chapel halls. It lived only in the margins, passed down not through scripture, but silence. It was a vow not of faith but of erasure, a covenant for those who had seen too much, who had touched what should not be touched, and now you understood you had become one of them. After that night in the hidden chamber, you awoke in your cell. The door was locked from the inside, though you remembered never closing it. The candles you had left unlit now burned low. Your robe was folded at the foot of the bed, but it wasn't your robe, it was newer, cleaner. Marked with a sigil you didn't recognize, curved lines that resembled both flame and script, like a language meant to be burned as it was read. Your old robe was gone, just like your name. You searched the archives. No record of your appointment, no signature in the guest ledgers, no mention in the council rosters. It was as if your presence had been rewound, spooled back into the silence that came before ink. At first, you panicked. You tried to show another monk the markings on your skin, but they saw nothing. You read passages aloud from the Forbidden Codex, but to them, the pages were blank. You were still here, yet already forgotten. And then, in a moment of quiet clarity, you realized the relic had not cursed you. It had given you a task, to carry the doctrine forward, not by preserving truth, but by removing it. You now understood the role of the scribes who came before. They hadn't recorded the past, they had rewritten it, rearranged history like bone fragments into a more palatable shape, trimmed the names of saints who bled the wrong color, crossed out prophecies that arrived too early. They hadn't betrayed the church, they had protected it from itself. One night in the silence of the lower scriptorium you found the book again, not on a shelf, not behind a lock. It sat on your desk as if waiting, the same leather cover, the same impossible warmth under your palm. When you opened it, the pages were filled, but not with words, with movements, lines that shifted as you read, like footprints being covered by falling snow. A single phrase repeated again and again between the shifting lines: erase what must not be remembered. Your hand moved without command, quill dipped, ink bled, you crossed out your birth record, then your ordination. Then every letter written by your hand, you crossed out yourself, and in that final act something shifted in the world. You were still breathing, still seeing, but no one greeted you in the hall, no one noticed when you stopped attending meals. No one questioned when your cell sat silent for weeks. You had become a ghost with duties, one who walks among records, not men. Some nights you hear another set of footsteps behind you in the archives, a younger scribe, a curious one. You watch as they pause in front of the wrong door. You see their hand reach for the handle, and you wonder, will they join you, or will you be the one to unwrite them before it's too late? The relic waits, the pages breathe, and the church still pretends none of it ever happened.